Hey everyone, my name is Rich, and this is the first episode of Rich Talks Records. And I thought about doing this for a number of years, and I always kind of, as a non sequitur, I always said I would do the first record I would review would be Lou Reed's Legendary Hearts, kind of apropos of nothing. But I decided if I was going to do this, that I should maybe expand the focus a little bit and kind of cover Reed's sort of middle 80's period, and start from when he had assembled a new band to when the last vestiges of that disintegrated before he didn't make a record for the better part of 3 years until he reemerged and kind of reinvented himself again with New York. So basically where I picked this up is Lou Reed had married Sylvia and had moved out of New York into Bearsville, and so it was kind of retraining his brain, was in recovery from alcohol, and who knows what else he was doing. I think he might have still been doing amphetamine, but certainly booze was, I think, probably the main demon he was battling there. And so, he got married and started. The Bells and Growing Up in Public had a fair amount of co-writes, an unprecedented amount of co-writes, really, for Lou Reed. And so he wanted to really reassert himself as a songwriter. He wanted to reassert himself as a guitar player. The guitar playing really is noticeably absent throughout his records in the 70s. And he found a foil, a genius foil, I think one of the greatest electric guitar players that ever lived, in Robert Quine, who had come to prominence as the guitar player for Richard Hell and the Voidoids. So if you have never heard the two Voidoids albums, especially the first one, Blank Generation, for the love of God, go listen to those, because I think that is electric guitar playing at a Jimi Hendrix, Otis Rush, Chuck Berry level of, Clarence White level of brilliance. So I kind of can't overrate Robert Quine enough. To my mind, he really could do it all, and he was an amazing counterpart to what Lou Reed was now forging for himself as a new guitar style. They got drummer, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Doane Perry. And then the linchpin of this era is Fernando Saunders. And then Fernando Saunders came back later on in the 90s and then just stayed almost until the very end. But Fernando Saunders, over the course of the 4 records that I'm going to talk about, takes on an increasing level of importance with each album, basically. So, start things off. I think my understanding, if what I read is correct, Reed already had some or all of the songs written for the first album, The Blue Mask, when he met Quine. From my understanding, there was a very long incubation period. So he put out Growing Up in Public in 1980, which was recorded and was at Montserrat, and that was like the last of the big band, with the big band and co-writes, and he was boozing and etc. But this was all about clarity and focus, and I think it took a long time for that clarity and focus to really get honed. And some of that is detailed pretty well in the most of the time salacious Victor Bocker's book, if you're interested in reading that and taking it with several grains of salt. Quine does a pretty interesting job of kind of explaining where Reed was at that point. My understanding is he, to some extent, when I say that he was rebuilding himself, to some extent, even his handwriting had grown increasingly erratic and illegible throughout the late 70s. So part of it was like not just rebuilding himself as a guitar player, as a songwriter, as a man, but also literally having better legibility of his handwriting. It was kind of down to that level. So anyway, the first album to come out of this new era is this masterpiece in 1982. I believe it was recorded at the end of 81, I think. It is The Blue Mask, cover by Sylvia. And this is a fascinating record because, for many reasons, and you can read all sorts of things into it, but really it's, clarity, focus, intensity, honesty. It is a kind of Bob Dylan, Blood on the Tracks, writing aesthetics meets John Lennon Plastic Ono Band production and presentation aesthetics. And it is, I think, as great as either of those in perfectly realized masterpieces. But what Reed does, and there was a critic who had pointed this out, but what Reed does that's so interesting is half the record, roughly, are celebrations of his newfound domesticity and sobriety. And then the other half are these really intense fever dreams and character studies, bizarre character studies. And so you have these freakouts, these fever dream freakouts, and then these very, very, very clear-headed depictions of life or reminiscences from when he was a younger man. And the through line of those two aspects. So this one critic had said that he managed to combine John Lennon's Double Fantasy with Plastic Ono Band, which is true in some ways, but Double Fantasy is a completely different set of aesthetics in my mind, production-wise and performance-wise. It's a totally different ethos. What the through line is here for me is the intensity. There's a feeling that they are constantly on the discovery, on the verge of discovering something new. As a band, as players, the songs sound new to Reed himself. It sounds like he's extemporizing them. According to one interview, there actually was a more extemporized version of the song The Gun. That has unfortunately never surfaced. I would love to hear that. I would love to hear any sort of session outtakes from this period. That would be absolutely fascinating. And how the hell he got from point A to B with this record. But there is a sense, kind of like some of the best 60s records or some of the best post-punk records, kind of like a little bit of like Love's Da Capo or the Beatles' Revolver. There's this sense, there's this kind of crackling electricity that they're constantly on the verge of something. They're constantly seeing land for the first time. And that's the through line. The whole album is kind of performed right on the edge. And it is incredible that they are able to start there and stay there throughout the entire album. It is an absolute masterpiece. I guess I'm going to do what other people do and do a sort of a track by track. I don't want to get too detailed. I could talk for hours about this album, and I don't want to get too lost in that because I have other records I want to talk about. So My House starts things off, again, really boiled down, concise, focused language, beautiful guitar interplay. I mean, absolutely stunning interplay. And then you have this kind of other ethereal dimension provided by Fernando Saunders' fretless bass. There are people that don't like Fernando Saunders' fretless bass in this period. Fuck that. It's awesome. It fills in the sound in a very not obvious, again, ethereal, beautiful way. So when people say that they don't like the fretless bass, I think they're mad, because it's outstanding, and counter melodies, and just his playing is so thoughtful and sympathetic to the song. So, you know, Reed obviously wrote and performed these songs. Quine is the big kind of co-star, but the secret weapon is Fernando Saunders. And then that segues directly into Women, which, you know, people have done all sorts of armchair psychology on. I'm not going to do that, of course, because that would be tawdry, and I think Reed himself was constantly at pains to avoid that type of shit. So I don't think Reed would be too into that. Again, Women is another fascinating song, juxtaposing memories of the past against his present self. That's also littered all throughout the lyrics to My House, which is, among many other things, a paean to his primary poetic influence, Delmore Schwartz. And then things really get going. There is the concise, perfect masterpiece of a song, Underneath the Bottle. A short, sharp, absolutely perfect piece of writing. I think that if John Lennon had lived into the 80s, going off of songs like You Saved My Soul, I think that this is the sort of thing that John would have been doing, hopefully, ideally. But it's that level of intensity and that level of just, you know, great, fascinating writerly details. And the song, like I said, it's just, it could almost be power pop. And except for the fact that the band is playing, like, you know, their lives depend on it. And Reed's vocal is perfect. His singing on this, he is sort of singing in a very open-throated and expressive manner. It's not the more clipped, odd phrasing that he got into later in the 70s, where some people think it was an almost parodic version of soul singing. This is, I don't know that I really agree with that assessment, but this is real soul singing. I mean, this is Reed really, really being expressive. And then, of course, that leads into The Gun, just very disturbing character study, especially, I mean, this was from 82. I can't imagine, you know, if he had continued to live and write songs throughout the 2000s, which that sort of trailed off, and he had addressed subject matter like this again, if he had revisited it, it's interesting to see where he would have taken that. But as it is, this is a wonderful, wonderful character study, you know, strange, on-the-edge characters, and also putting the domesticity that's in the rest of the album, the threat of that domesticity, you know, in a public setting. It's just, it's again, great writing, very, very disturbing, and dark. But that's nothing compared to the phantasmagoria of how side one ends with The Blue Mask. Simply put, this is, so I was familiar with the Velvet Underground in high school. I had gotten, as part of Columbia House, I had gotten that compilation that wasn't terribly good, The Words and Music of Lou Reed. Excuse me. But that was my first time hearing those songs. Not the best presentation, but it was enough to make me a fan, and it was enough to dazzle me. And but I didn't get any Reed solo records until after I was out of high school, and I was dating a girl who had made a mixtape. She was a big fan of his solo records, and The Blue Mask was her favorite. And she put the song The Blue Mask as, like, whatever, the second or third song on this mixtape that she made me. And for reference, this would be 1996. And so that really was one of the first Reed solo songs I ever heard, and I thought it was just absolutely incredible. You think about 1982, you think we're kind of in the post-punk era. The 80s as we know them are just kind of getting started. That's MTV's first year. No wave is still around. You have the post-punk bands, but they're beginning to go in a more commercial direction, or indeed into a commercial zone in some instances. And this is some of the most challenging solo music that Lou Reed ever made, especially within the context of it being a rock and roll song. It's not like a 10-minute feedback epic. It's still very much a rock song, but it has a willingness to delve into oblivion and audio squalor that most people just don't have the guts to do. And a lot of people, I think, throughout the 90s and 2000s went out of their way to avoid doing. But this truly jumps in to the psychodrama. So the music and the intensity of the rhythm section matches, so you have the intensity of the rhythm section, and on top of that you have the guitars. What Quine and Reed are mixed in separate speakers. They are absolutely phenomenal in terms of their interplay. And then on top of that, you have Reed, who delivers the vocal performance of a lifetime. Again, this is, to keep invoking this, but this is Plastic Ono Band Mother or Well level performance and level intensity. It is, again, you could armchair quarterback all sorts of armchair psychotherapist. All sorts of stuff out of this, but it is it's a absolute triumph of a piece of music. And when people are obsessed with the Velvet Underground to the exclusion of other stuff that Reed did, they are truly missing something by not having this song in their lives, or this album. Side 2 opens, and again, so this is another character study. And how much is Reed in character? How much is he not in character? And that's Average Guy. Average Guy is another, again, short, sharp, concise piece of writing. It builds its world immediately. All the details are correct. So it's along the lines of Underneath the Bottle. It is not maybe one of the standout songs, but it moves the album along perfectly and kind of brings us into the second half. Then there is the one real diversion on this record, which is the Heroine, female version of Hero, not the drug. And it's a great song. It could almost be like a sea shanty or something. Great song, great piece of writing, very understated. There's no pummeling rhythm section on it. I've never fully worked out how it fits into the rest of the record, but I am glad it is there. I've always thought of it as maybe a slightly less disturbing counterpoint to The Gun, maybe. But I'm glad it's there. I would rather it be on the album than not be on the album, because it's fantastic. And then we get into the next big rock and roll freakout, which is, again, an absolutely tremendous sort of showpiece for the dueling guitars of Reed and Quine. And that is Waves of Fear, an absolutely heroic vocal, an absolutely brilliant lyric, but the sort of the crowning achievement then at the very end, though, is Fernando Saunders's kind of leaping bass line, which ties the song together and gives it a weird feeling of hope, a feeling that you are going to make it through that dark night of the soul and see your way through the waves of fear. Maybe that's where the heroine's place is. Maybe the heroine is in the water and it's leading to the waves of fear. I don't know. But Waves of Fear, again, like the Blue Mask, absolute triumph of writing and performance. And then we get into probably the piece that's most based on remembrances. And Reed picks a fascinating subject, kind of the ultimate baby boomer obsession, and that's the day John Kennedy died. but Reed does it without mawkishness or sentimentality. It winds up being, it's almost like, I feel like if David Lynch was more of like a musician or a songwriter, I feel like this is how he would approach writing about Kennedy's assassination. Again, brilliant piece of writing, very, very boiled down, and that leads us to the final song, the love song, which circles us back to the beginning of My House, which is Heavenly Arms. It's the most kind of overtly doo-wop based thing on the album. There's kind of a 50s vibe in a weird way on this record, and Heavenly Arms, I think, is the one that makes that the most overt. It is gorgeous. It's just an absolutely beautiful, sincere love song. Again, people could make things out of it that I'm not going to touch. But the one thing I will say that is interesting is the most directly personal line of Sylvia, you mean so much to me. He leaves to Fernando Saunders to sing in a falsetto. I've always found that interesting. That's the most direct line on the whole record. At the very end, the bass player sings. Odd touch. At any rate, this is an absolute masterpiece. The production is perfect and concise, and how many times have I used the word concise? Really, one cannot say enough about this album. I have not shut up about it since I got it as a much younger man. It's also interesting to think that in 1982, you know, where were his peers at that point? 82, 83, Iggy was going to Zombie Birdhouse. It's somewhere over here somewhere. Which I should review that because I love that record. But, you know, in the period that I'm talking about in this video, you know, Iggy kind of goes from the depths of despair to commercial rehabilitation and some level of sobriety. Alice Cooper makes much the same journey. David Bowie goes from his gigantic commercial triumph of Let's Dance to the depths of commercial and critical despair. It's interesting to think about sort of what happens to some of the peers along the way. I always feel bad, that thing about the sacred triangle of Reed, Iggy, and Bowie, and then because there's the people who say plus Alice. So first of all, poor Alice, like he doesn't like he gets like an asterisk, and then I've always had to figure like somewhere in the universe, Mark Bolan saying, what about me? Did I not do enough? Anyway, Reed did not tour on the Blue Mask, but he did do a show, was it 1 or 2 shows at the Bottom Line, came out on this, A Night with Lou Reed. This has since been reissued many times and gone around, and I might be misremembering, I feel like they put out a different concert with the same cover, or they shoved 2 concerts together. I don't remember. But at any rate, this is the VHS I would have bought at some point in the later 90s. This show is an absolute triumph. He is on his way to the next record with, that would be Legendary Hearts. This is the same band as who played on the Blue Mask, with the notable exception that Doane or Doane, I sorry if you, I don't know anything about him, but he is not around anymore. I have no idea why he's not around. That is never covered in any of the books I've read. It's a shame because he's an amazing drummer. They got Fred Maher, who was the later period drummer on the Voidoids. So 1982 was also the year that the Voidoids made their much delayed second album, Destiny Street, and so Fred Maher and Robert Quine are half the band on that record. So it's interesting that right around the same time they made, you know, they became sort of a traveling half band. So Fred Maher is on this. He's fantastic and he's great, but there's something about Mr. Perry, I don't want to keep mangling his first name, that is that is just really, 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 really special. But Fred Maher is perfectly good, and there's nothing really to critique. But this is an absolutely triumphant performance. Reed is in top form, and they bust out a version of Waves of Fear that is for the ages. The other thing is a song that we will be getting to in a moment on Legendary Hearts is played here, Turn Out the Lights, which Reed extends out with this beautiful, almost Dwayne Eddy-esque guitar solo. Also, just purely watching Reed and Quine do their guitar thing, actually getting to see it happen is awesome. Because, you know, you can imagine it when you listen to the records, but to actually look at it and to see Quine's just totally inexpressive face. I mean, it's like when you watch the Hendrix Isle of Wight performance, and it's just this kind of, you know, all of it's just coming out of the guitar itself, you know. So this has to be on YouTube somewhere. It is superb. It is totally worth it. And I don't know that this version has it. Somewhere at some point there's the footage taken backstage, and Sylvia comes backstage, and it's so funny because she like sort of runs over to give Reed a hug, and he is so they're filming I feel like that's like a true little peek at what they were like. Like, I'm surprised that even made it into the cut, because it feels like a true, like a capturing a truly unscripted moment. Anyway, moving on. So this is the next record. I'd already pulled out the inner sleeve. This is 1983's Legendary Hearts. So the imposing motorcycle helmet, and then the very sort of humble, I'm a man in my early 40s, you know, I'm an average guy, photo on the back, and the inner sleeve has, I believe this is from the video for Women, which, if you see it, is not a terribly great video. It's interesting, but it's odd. And then another motorcycle and guitar photo of Mr. Reed. So this album came out a year after The Blue Mask. It is often, critically, the two albums are often considered of a piece. I feel like this album is a huge step down. Not huge, but it is a step down. I think that to lump this in with The Blue Mask does The Blue Mask a disservice. This, to me, is simply a not as good version. Certainly not as visceral, but also, I think, just not as well written. It is less focused. So the album, there's not a lot known about it. It's not a particularly fabled album. So the big story about this record, the one that everybody talks about, is what Robert Quine discussed in the aforementioned Victor Bockris book, and that is that him and Reed's relationship was deteriorating, and that Reed mixed him down on the record, much as he allegedly had to, you know, to sort of gain the upper hand of some sort with the making of the third Velvet Underground record, that Reed went back and remixed it. Now, and that was kind of the story about this record, that there's somehow a better mixed version out there somewhere, or that it could be remixed and improved upon, and that it would be improved upon with the guitar parts really fully reinstated, and not kind of presented in sort of a washed out way. Anyway, so that was the story about this record for many years, and recently a fellow on social media got hold of just like the board mixes before Reed went in to start mixing. They just kind of did like a very straight band mix, and the engineer of the album, whose name escapes me, had a copy of it. And things went out and went around and got out to this guy who runs a Lou Reed page. And I don't know what the legality of all these things are, so I'm being sort of vague on purpose. I don't want to get anybody popped. So he, when he put this stuff up, the idea was that this was the rebuttal to that narrative. And so I got to hear the sort of, I guess you would call them rough mixes of the album. It still sounds basically the same. It doesn't sound terribly different. So the theory is the rebuttal is that the album just wasn't recorded very well, and that when Reed went in to mix it, as opposed to mixing Quine down, that Reed was just trying to do more of just an overall salvage job. He was doing more of a salvage job, not a sabotage. And certainly not some sort of power move against his guitar player. So I think that what I heard pretty much bears that out. Because what I heard, again, doesn't sound terribly different. And I don't know that there was much that really could have been done. If that was just the straight board mix, I think it was just going to sound how it was going to sound, unless Reed was really going to get into fucking around with technology and making it like an experimental album or something. I think they tried to get another very dry, intimate sound like they had on the Blue Mask, but this time it did not happen. I guess that is down to some of the equipment that they used, whatever, the board was different. Again, I don't know the specifics. I wasn't there. But it does not have the presence, it does not have the aura, it does not have the vibe of the Blue Mask. And then the writing tends to be poorer relations of that album. So start things off with Legendary Hearts. Again, really wonky music video, not terribly good. Sometimes discovering music videos from that era of people is a delight, because you'll see all sorts of odd things, especially because it was the early period of MTV, so they're trying to sort of work out what they want to do. And this is not that. They're just these very kind of like not terribly engaged performance clips, Anyway. Starts things out with the title track, Legendary Hearts. And Legendary Hearts, first of all, it begins with one of the great things that I love about Reed's music is, he loved electric guitar, and he loved the possibilities of the electric guitar and exploring tonalities and different drones. And I mean, that obviously goes all the way back to the Velvet Underground. But there are just these beautiful, beautiful moments in Reed's musical output, like the opening of Sweet Jane, or the beginning of She's My Best Friend on Coney Island Baby, and then the beginning of Legendary Hearts is absolutely gorgeous. That, just as a sort of little standalone piece of music, is one of my favorite things that he ever recorded. Then it goes into the song itself. The song itself is, again, it's like mature doo-wop. It's like a mature version of Brill Building stuff. The lyrics are, again, the focus and the cohesion of the last album is very much here. Again, Reed's writerliness, the consideration of every word, the subtleties and nuances of the vocal performance. All of that stuff is there. The expressiveness is there. It's Fernando plays beautifully. And yes, the band. Quine's back, Fernando's back, and Fred Maher plays on this. And absolutely, absolutely wonderful. It's one of his finest songs. And again, I feel like Legendary Hearts is almost like mature Buddy Holly. Like if Buddy Holly had aged into being a singer-songwriter in the 70s, but didn't necessarily go country or go into ballads, this is the level that he would have been writing at, I think. Or, again, I think if John Lennon had lived, I feel like it's conceivable that this is what he would have been doing something like this. I feel like Reed really carried that mantle forward. And, you know, and it's a testament to his talent that he was able to do that. I don't know if that, of course, you have no idea if that is any kind of deliberate decision. He probably would think it is a moronic assertion on my part. It very well could be carrying out the aesthetics of just his new lifestyle, new approach. You know, again, focus and clarity. You know, I think those were the watchwords of the time. But then we get into Don't Talk to Me About Work. And Don't Talk to Me About Work is kind of where the problems begin. It is a character study, but not a terribly compelling one. The details aren't terribly interesting, and the song sort of trundles along. I think it attempts kind of a working man's relatability that maybe Reed just isn't terribly good at conveying. It's the first odd... I know people like this song. I've never cared for it. It's not bad, but it's not great, and it's really not on the level of... it's the weakest song yet from this period. And then we get into Make Up My Mind. Make Up My Mind is interesting. It's... Given that everything is very boiled down on these records, this song is particularly stark and minimalistic. And I actually wish that the record had gone more in this direction, because this could have been the harbinger of... I feel like if they had pursued this further, it could have been the harbinger of another creative period for Reed. It's almost like a rock and roll version or a stripped down instrumentation version of what Bowie was doing on Low. I love it. It's a fantastic song. And then there's Martial Law. And I don't understand, again, character study, I don't understand what the fuck this is supposed to be. I don't know. I've never understood this song. I've never understood why he is conveying these ideas in this way. I find it utterly confusing. And again, kind of like Don't Talk to Me About Work, it just kind of trundles along. It at times really feels directionless. Place this song on A Night at Lou Reed, and it works better live. Some of these Legendary Hearts songs worked better live just because there's the energy of the band, but in this more kind of staid production environment with a much drier, boxier sound than what they had on the Blue Mask, I just don't... It just doesn't work. At least to me it doesn't. And again, I don't understand what he was going for. There are moments in Reed's work like that, like a notorious one would be Animal Language on Sally Can't Dance. You tell me. I don't get it. And then The Last Shot. The Last Shot, I feel, is a song that a lot of critics point to as being a great song about the struggling to maintain sobriety. To me, it's a not as good version of Underneath the Bottle. And it almost starts to veer back into the overwriting that he did on Growing Up in Public. It's not a bad song. It's certainly better than Martial Law, whatever the hell that is. So I don't dislike it, and in a certain frame of mind, I very much appreciate it. But one album before was Underneath the Bottle, which is the, you know, which is the peak of songwriting about attempting to maintain sobriety. So, and then I've already mentioned this song. Side one ends with a quiet, perfect little masterpiece. One of the true delights of Reed's solo oeuvre. Turn Out the Light. This is a quiet, understated, beautifully written song. Again, it's a starker, more minimalistic structure like Make Up My Mind. I really wish that he'd written more of these. These are interesting. It feels like if some of these songs feel like novels cut down to short stories, this feels like a short story cut down to haiku. And its lack of story, its lack of detail makes it that much more compelling. And the way that he sings it, you feel like he really loves this song, and you feel like this song really means something to him. And it must have, because there's a lot of care and love in the guitar solo that he plays on the Night at Lou Reed iteration of this song. This on this album does not have that. Part of me wishes it does, but you know what? It really works as a, how long is that song? Let me check. Nope. It's 2 minutes, 45 seconds, in and out. I think it also is just perfect as 2 minutes, 45 seconds. I don't think, on record at least, maybe it does need to be longer. Side B. Another song. Pow Wow. I guess he's trying to make some sort of social statement. I don't know. Again, like, Don't Talk to Me About Work and Martial Law, I don't know why the fuck he decided to write it this way. Fernando Saunders' lovely bass playing can't really do much with it. Again, this is another song. I fail to understand what he's driving at. And when I do feel like I am understanding what he's driving at, I can't get around the question of why write it like this. It is just an odd piece of writing that, to my mind, truly does not come across. The best thing I can say for it is I feel like it's kind of planting seeds for some of the stuff that he would later do on New York. But that's the best I can do for trying to understand this song. And then there's Betrayed. I can't help but think that if this was on the previous album, it would have been performed with a little bit more gusto. Again, this is more in the stark minimalistic, but it's almost a cod country song. But it's written very well. You know, he gets the details right, sings it beautifully. The band performance is a little roped in. Again, I just think it probably would have been better on the last album. And then there's Bottoming Out, which to me is, of the two songs about maintaining sobriety, I guess Legendary Hearts could be the other song about that as well, but the songs that directly deal with that topic. Bottoming Out is the far superior one. In that I think that it expands on the vibe of Underneath the Bottle, and really takes it into kind of some disturbing psychological places. I feel like, I feel like this is something that you write after you've been through a lot of therapy. Where you are making connections between various aspects of your behavior, and as you become more self-actualized, you can see how these different parts of yourselves connect. Fernando, this is some of his best bass playing, really beautiful playing, and Reed's singing. You know, like I said, there was sort of an overwriting on the last shot. And there's a little bit of a over-performing on that song that feels like this sort of odd play acting, which is one of the big problems on Growing Up in Public. This, he's really singing as that character. It's really, really moving. So I love Bottoming Out. That's an expansion off of what he was doing off the last album. I feel like this, some of the more minimalist pieces and the title song, that's expanding and pointing where else this I don't know, this band, this ethos, where it can go. Then there is the big epic of the record, Home of the Brave, which comes in at a whopping near 7 minutes, and you feel every second of it. It is the starkest and most minimalist, but not necessarily in a good way. It feels underwritten, and like Pow Wow, you feel like it is straining to make a social point, but I don't know that it makes it effectively. It is just it's a dolorous, endless song performed without, I don't know, it seems as if it's performed without much commitment. The band seems to be sleepwalking through it. Reed throws in, what's the song? Is it by Solomon Burke? I forget the name of the song. He throws in lyrics from this soul song, and at the end, and I don't think that he didn't mean it, but the you know, it's far more ambitious than anything else here, but it ultimately, the whatever the core truth of it is, I just feel is not being conveyed. And it just sort of eats up all of this time on side 2, because the rest of these songs are fairly short. So I don't want to damn it too much, because I think it's interesting, and I think it means something to him. It's almost like Prince's 3 Chains of Gold. Like, you know, where it's like, wow, this person's really throwing themselves into this. It means something. It means something to the person who made this. And again, I think Reed trying to do something this ambitious, pitched against the band, just sounding like they're on autopilot. It's an odd combination, and it doesn't do the song any favors. It doesn't do the album any favors, and just being the penultimate track on side 2, it just eats up time. But then things rally, like side 1. It ends with a beautiful, beautiful minimalist 3 minutes and 4 seconds slice of personal life, I guess, song called Rooftop Garden. Rooftop Garden, we're back to Turn Out the Light, Legendary Hearts, some of the best songs on the first album. Reed builds this world very quickly, a few kind of deft touches, but also just the tonality of his own voice, the intimacy with which he sings about the intimate details. It's conveyed immediately, beautifully, perfectly. And this time he throws in was it the Drifters up on the roof? So this time the interpolation of soul lyrics really works. It's just it's a beautiful, beautiful song that at this point I said before that he was carrying the mantle for sort of John Lennon and Buddy Holly. But I think with this, I mean, this is a song that's totally Lou Reed. You know, it's kind of in that school, but this really is his sensibilities, and it ends the album on a lovely, graceful note. That needs it. So, by the way, one of the last things Reed ever did was he remastered all of his albums and put them out in a gigantic box set. He had done all the Velvet records too. So I have these albums on vinyl, but I also have these. I used to have a lot of them on CD, but back in the very late 90s, early 2000s, I would do this strange thing where if I bought an album on CD and then later bought it on vinyl, I would divest myself of the CD, not thinking that there someday would readily be CD players in cars, or that there may be something known as digitizing your music. So a lot of REM, Rolling Stones, Neil Young would be where Neil would be over here somewhere. My cat's having an asthma attack. She has been having a rough day. It's terrible. And it's not great that it's being preserved here. Anyway. So, and there's not much I can do about it. We give her a pill with her food. It's, you know. Anyway, I don't have digital copies of a lot of certain bands. The Beatles, until the 2009 box set, where are the Beatles? Here they are. Until the 2009 box set, I did not have a single Beatles album, the main studio albums, that is, on CD. It was vinyl or nothing. Also, from right around the time of the Legendary Hearts sessions, what was the album? What was the movie called? I forget the name of the movie now. Lou Reed did a song on a movie soundtrack, and damn it if I can't remember the name of the thing. I've seen the movie. It's not terribly good. There are a couple iconic Reed moments in the movie, but he performs this song that later came out on the Between Thought and Expression box set called Little Sister. In my perfect world, Little Sister, which runs a little over 6 minutes, is a part of Legendary Hearts. So when I have kind of made a mix of Legendary Hearts for myself, Little Sister takes the place of Home of the Brave. It is a beautiful, beautiful song. Again, you don't want to confuse the song with the songwriter, but you can't help but think that there's a lot of details that are specific to Lou Reed as a person, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful song, and it has that it has everything working on it. The interplay of him and Quine, Fernando beautifully filling in beyond that. The band really plays as one. It's gorgeous. And Reed is just really charming and expressive on it. Great, great, great song that I wish was better known. The band went out after Legendary Hearts. Is that right? Yeah, I think it is. They went out and toured Europe, and resulted in this live in Italy. I remember, so this was an import record for a really long time. And I remember buying this, so again, I would have bought this in the late 90s, and I remember standing on a train platform, looking at the track listing and looking at the cover, and just thinking, this is going to be amazing. And there's a picture of the band on the inside. I don't know if you can, if I'm doing that well. And there's no going back. It is actually a very diffuse live record that is really frustratingly kind of, I don't know, it just feels neither here nor there. I've tried listening to it a few times over the years. I listened to it at night, I would listen to it in the morning, listen to it in the car, it just doesn't really come together for me, and I can never really figure out why. The band is playing just fine, the sound is just fine, but that's and then that's the problem. The whole thing winds up being just fine. The lone exception, and the reason I'm even mentioning this, is the last song, Rock and Roll. They do a version of Rock and Roll with again, Lou Reed interpolating lyrics from a soul song. This time it is Stevie Wonder's masterpiece, Uptight. And this is one of the single greatest fucking performances in Lou Reed's life. It is amazing. It is the reason to have this. Reed, it is one of the most passionate, expressive, beautiful, masterful fucking rock and roll performances. This is why Lou Reed is great. On top of that, you have Fernando Saunders performing a galloping bass line that is right up there with the best of what Steve Harris can do. Fernando can gallop like nobody's fucking business. It is incredible. It's one of my favorite things out of all the music that I've heard in my life. That is one of my favorite moments ever. So, it's worth listening to the kind of rest of the concert. So, after all of this, for various reasons, not worth recounting, Quine was out. He was recording. So the official story was that he was recording his album, which was called Basic, around this time. I do not have a copy of Basic. As big of a fan as I am, I do not have that record. So that was the sort of official story, and Lou Reed recorded this, New Sensations, from 1984. And New Sensations, there he is saying, oh my god, yet another fucking photo session. New Sensations, so Robert Quine, in the Bacchus book, posited the theory that following the good critical notices, but not great sales of the Blue Mask, that Reed was on a mission to slightly commercialize more every time, thus resulting in a gigantic comeback. Now, we are now 1 year out at this point from Bowie's Let's Dance, so perhaps Reed had an eye on that, who knows. Who knows what his thinking was. But the album starts off with, so he's the only guitar player on this record, which, is that the only time that ever happened? It may very well be. I'm trying to think. I think this might be the lone, that's weird. This might be the lone solo album that he made that he's the only guitar player on. Wow. Including the Velvets, yeah. Huh. Anyway, strange. It kicks off with I Love You, Suzanne. Now, I once had a mixtape that I kept in the car that began with I Love You, Suzanne. And it had all sorts of other stuff on it. And, I was driving around one night with this girl who was very self-consciously cool and, had great taste in, foreign films and, and music, and knew which restaurants to go to. She was, kind of, in the know about everything. And we had been listening to this tape. It had picked up kind of in the middle of side 2. And she was really enjoying it. And I remember I remember where we were driving, and the tape rolled over to side 1, and I Love You, Suzanne started. And she got, like, angry. She was like, why are you making me listen to this shit? She hated the song. Fuck that. I Love You, Suzanne is awesome. It's a great pop song. It's fantastic. Reed started off with doo-wop. He was, the staff songwriter for, the sort of knockoff Brill Building. I can't remember the name of the outfit now that he started off working for, but some rip-off record company. I have I have one of those compilations that he wrote, like, fake surf songs for. It's in here somewhere. I don't remember the name of it. At any rate, I Love You, Suzanne. Reed always had that sort of pop sensibility. It was always there. It was on the first Velvets record, and this is the 1980s, a guy in his 40s adult version of that, and I think it's sublime. Now, what is not sublime is the completely insane music video with Reed chatting up this lady in a phone booth, and then the utterly incomprehensible. Seriously, if you're watching this and if you are interested in hearing any of these records, listen to these records, form your own opinions, and then go watch this music video. Don't watch the fucking music video first, because holy God Almighty, is it hard to watch. Read 2 years or 3 years before George Harrison did it with the "I Got My Mind Set on You." During the guitar break in the middle, has what I would have to imagine is a body double. I don't think Reed got down like that. This body double. The band is performing on the stage, and this body double jumps off the stage and proceeds to do a dance performance with the hot 80s video chick. And it is just brain melting. It's thoroughly awful, and I don't know that kitsch can save it. Poptimism certainly can't save it. Dear God Almighty, is it? Yeah. So don't watch it last. Do it. Make it the last thing you do. It's just awful. Anyway, we move on to "Endlessly Jealous." "Endlessly Jealous" is great. It's a great song. It's a so the production, I will say, is a lot more mainstream. I believe, I don't know the technicalities, but I would have to imagine that this is what they call gated drums. The 80s drum sound has finally shown up. The 80s as we know them are now underway. All the things that happened in the 80s are now happening. So this has that, but it's still sort of conforming instrumentally, at least, to the last two records. And though this is a far more jovial album, as you can tell by the "Look, I like video games" album cover, this song still very much carries on the vibe and sort of character study thing of the last two records, and expands on it again in a really interesting way. As the details are right, it's less, it's less visceral, it's less committed, but it's still really, really strong. And then there is "My Red Joystick," which is, the people who don't like this record, and I used to get clowned on a lot for not liking this record. "My Red Joystick," which came out as a single, and there's another dopey ass video for it. I feel like that this is kind of what these people have paid attention to. "My Red Joystick" is not terribly good. It doesn't work as on a pop level. It's, yeah, there's not really anything whatsoever that I like about it. And in fact, I barely have ever listened to this song. Whenever I have played this album, and there are parts of it that I've played a lot, I've always skipped that song. And then there's "Turn to Me," which I actually saw Reed play live in 2000, and he fucking ripped it up. It was awesome. "Turn to Me" is fantastic, and it's almost like I've sort of noted the kind of 50s vibe of a lot of kind of the subtext or underpinning of a lot of this stuff. Kind of has a 50s vibe. This is like Reed trying to write like a soul song, almost like a I don't want to say Motown, but maybe more like a Stax song, but he's doing it like in his own weird way, and he's like fucking around with the form in an interesting way. So I feel like if "My Red Joystick" is him self-consciously writing pop, this is him trying to write soul, but doing it in a way where he's going to put in his own personality and his own weird details, and it has kind of a weird sense of humor to it. It's fantastic. It's a great piece of writing, and Fernando, Fernando now, especially with Quine gone, is really heavily involved. So Fernando's backing vocals on this are beautiful, and yeah, it is a great song. And then we get onto the last song of side one, and that is "New Sensations," the title track. "New Sensations" has some of the most gorgeous guitar playing that Reed ever did. It is, well, I'm gonna say it's a better song than anything on Legendary Hearts, and certainly on the album after this. It's one of, his absolute best songs of the 80s and one of his absolute best songs ever. Saw him perform this a couple times. And then but also on bootlegs and stuff. But he was performing this I saw him in '96 when he was touring for Set the Twilight Reeling. This song is absolutely sensational. Everything I've been talking about in terms of a mature version of the 1950s, a mature version of Buddy Holly or John Lennon, writerly details, his own fascinating character studies, world building, and then that absolutely fucking gorgeous autumnal guitar playing that is so expressive and so delicate. It's an absolutely perfectly realized, beautiful, winding epic that I have loved from the first time I've ever heard it, and that to me is one of the things that makes this a great album. So the people who focus on My Red Joystick or the gated drums, or they don't like I Love You, Suzanne, this is really what they're missing out on, because a song like this is what ties together the rest of the album. I've often kind of felt that New Sensations is almost like a 80's version of Loaded, a self-conscious attempt to be understandable and relatable to a wider audience. And in the same way that Loaded has two absolute masterpieces on it, Rock and Roll and Sweet Jane, I feel like this album, this is the first of the two masterpieces. This is the Rock and Roll or the Sweet Jane of this album. And it ties together all of the more self-conscious experiments at appealing to more people. And this is just an incredible song. And I can't think of anybody else who would have ever thought to have written it. I think, especially, again, if you're going off of his peers, Iggy wasn't recording anything by this point. This is and neither was Alice, but this is miles beyond anything David did on Tonight or Never Let Me Down. I mean, this is miles beyond. It's miles beyond anything from any of Neil Young's middle 80s records. It's miles beyond anything Dylan was doing from Empire Burlesque over the next several years until Oh Mercy. I think that if Dylan had continued down the road of what would have been the original version of Infidels, now that's on the level of this, but not in terms of the release, certainly not in terms of the things he released, and certainly not post Infidels. This is very magical and special. Then side B opens with the next one, also the Rock and Roll or Sweet Jane of this record, the second masterpiece, and that's Doing the Things That We Want To. Again, completely unique. No one else was writing songs like this. No one else was thinking like this. This is the proof that rock and roll can be made by adults about adult things. It's beautifully fully realized. There is the, I guess, somewhat apocryphal story of Bob Dylan seeing Reed perform this and turning to the person next to him and saying, I wish I'd written this song. This is a great song. I wish I'd written this song. And that person either being a roadie or being Sylvia, I don't remember who. And I feel like if that story is actually true, that makes a lot of sense. It is a celebration of, survival into middle age. Again, it's just it's a triumph. It's truly, truly a thing of beauty. And the lyrics, I have to believe that Reed meant every single lyric in this and really means it when he sings it. And so it's unlike anything else. It's beautiful. What becomes a legend most? I mean, obviously the the tie back to Loaded and New Age is I think kind of obvious there. It's a good song, not a great song, but it's an effective it's an effective character study. It's musically very lovely, moves things along. Fly Into the Sun is unfortunately a little too 80s in its production. I think the song itself, again, there's Ride Into the Sun from the Loaded period. Fly Into the Sun is I really like the song. I like the performance, not thrilled with the production, put it that way. And then we get into My Friend George, which is sort of a weaker relation to the the day John Kennedy died. It's interesting, not great, but it's a not as good version of the reminiscences. But I think it's still effective. It's just not on quite the same level. And then there is High in the City, which is, now it's 80s and it's a little frivolous. And the writing doesn't really stand up, especially on an album like with the title track and Doing the Things We Want to and Turn to Me. It just doesn't, I don't know. Yeah, it's sort of, this and My Red Joystick are sort of the nadir of the record, and unfortunately a sign of things to come. And then things end with, tying it all together, Down at the Arcade, which is silly, and especially given the last two albums, it's light relief coming after the last couple records. But I kind of like it. It's the sort of thing you really have to be in the mood for. But the one thing that is funny, I'm talking about his use of soul lyrics. I believe on record, so on the lyric sheet, it's the Four Tops singing I'll Be There. So he gets it right on the lyric sheet. I don't know if you can see that. But on record, he said it's the Temps singing I'll Be There. Now, I haven't looked into whether the Temptations did record a version of that song. They very well could have, because, all those Motown acts are making like 8 albums a year. But I'm pretty sure, they certainly didn't have the hit with it. I mean, like Gladys Knight, right, was recorded, I Heard It Through the Grapevine and stuff. But I don't know that they did a version of I'll Be There. So that's just sort of a funny, Reed actually gets the Motown group wrong. And then they went out on tour, and Robert Quine was back. He was back, baby. And is he listed here? No, he isn't. They added a keyboard/accordion player. Well, accordion on one song, or whatever those things are called, a hurdy-gurdy or a music box. I forget. So it's not listed, and I don't remember. You'll have to forgive me. And it was Fred Maher, the drummer on this one. Yeah, so Fred Maher is still the drummer. Oh, Peter Wood. I'm going to take a stab. I'm pretty sure it's Peter Wood. Yeah, it's accordion. So Peter Wood joins the band here on this tour as a keyboard player. Now, this is Lou Reed, Coney Island Baby. And this is great because it has little liner notes by Reed. So it's still... Oh, and Fred Maher was now gone. I'm not sure why he left, but he was gone. And is replaced by, I believe his name is Vinnie Ferrari. And, Vinnie Ferrari basically is the... he's kind of the weak link of the band here. And at times he kind of brings the whole thing down. Vinnie Ferrari... is very robotic in his playing. He is exacting to a fault. At times it feels like he might as well be a drum machine, and I want to say he's playing kind of like a weird sort of octopad kind of kit. It's really not flattering. I just, apologies. I just do not care for his drumming style. And I think he was just around for this tour. I don't think he lasted too long, but good Lord, there are some rough patches with his playing. Now, the whole vibe of this tour is very different than the Night with Lou Reed. This is, or even the Live in Italy, because Live in Italy doesn't really sort of commit to a vibe. Maybe that's its problem. But this is sort of a user-friendly, like, it's a far more engaging. It's not pandering, but it's far more engaging. The unexpurgated whole performance is up on YouTube. So this is now a relic of its time. The full show is absolutely fascinating because it has Jim Carroll's performance. So I think the idea was past, present, and future. Maybe Jim Carroll being the future, and then the legendary, amazing Chantels being the past, I guess. But then Reed's band backs up the Chantels. So this has however many songs it has. This is severely cut down. The full version of the show on YouTube has a really fascinating cross-section of songs that I don't know why, maybe just simply for length, but should have been included. The performance, again, it's not anywhere near as intense or as focused, but the Quine-Reed guitar section is masterful. It's always a joy to get to hear them. Some of Quine's solos are just absolutely beautiful. It's great to hear him play on the New Sensations songs. They do a version of Doing the Things That We Want To that is incredible. Reed sings it like, he's fully in it, and it is very moving. Very earnest in a way in which he usually isn't. And so there's kind of a fun vibe that normally doesn't really exist with Reed. And it's a really enjoyable show. It's just not the focused sort of awesome statement that A Night with Lou Reed is. And again, Vinnie Ferrari's drumming, I just do not care for. Like, kind of no matter what's happening with the rest of the band, he's just straight ahead. It's just not the kind of drumming that I think is flattering for a rock and roll band. I'll diplomatically state it that way. But the keyboard player does a perfectly fine job. He gets a few solos. Fernando's bass playing is amazing as always. So that's kind of the last hurrah of the live version of that band. Quine was now out. By the way, I'm actually, before I get into that, I will say, by this point in the mid 80s, it's interesting that between 82 to 86. REM went from their first single to their first gold album. So there's this sort of arc of them coming into their own. Sonic Youth went from being a no-wave band to making Evol, which is the first sort of Sonic Youth as we know them album. The Black Flag went from having put out Damaged to their final record. There's a lot that sort of happens in this era, and one of the things that really gets going, I think, is the next wave of Velvet Underground historical obsession. And it's interesting with the Velvets because they were obviously this huge inspiration for the punk movement, but I feel like they came to mean very different things to people in the 80s, and then again into the 90s, and then now into the new century. I think, so they meant something else again in the early 2000s with the neo garage bands, and then they meant something else again after Reed died. And it's interesting because I remember reading years ago about the Beatles. This is back in the early 90s, about how every successive generation of music fans, which is usually sort of marked by 5 to 7 year increments, took from a different phase of the Beatles, or was, influenced by a different period of the Beatles. So, the prog people focused on one, the neo-psychedelic people focused on another. There were the people who focused on the Hamburg, live in Hamburg stuff, the whatever, Billy Childish and some of those people obsessing over the early records. So I feel like the Velvets weren't really long enough or documented enough on record for them to have distinct phases the way the Beatles did. But it is interesting that that people took all these sort of different meanings from the Velvet Underground. And one of the things in the Bachris book that he talks about is, when they did their reunion tour, and he breaks it down, and I don't remember, but it's, in France they were romantic. In Germany they were Dadaists. In England they were radicals. And, so this is all sort of happening. The sort of college rock thing, the fermentation of what would become alternative rock in the 90s, all of that's happening. And it's just interesting that the man at the center, who wrote most of the songs and who most of it was certainly his vision, not to discount the other members and Andy Warhol and Billy Name and On Dean, etc. But it's just interesting that he was kind of putting out an album roughly one a year, kind of sort of quietly and just sort of keeping things moving along. He was not commercially huge. I think New Sensations, I think I Love You Suzanne made the bottom reaches of the top 40. But it's interesting that he didn't sort of go huge like David Bowie. He wasn't, sort of, again, kind of in the depths of sort of oblivion the way Alice got to, or Iggy briefly was. But that he just sort of kept at it. And it's also interesting because, Legendary Hearts is a not terribly ambitious album. New Sensations is ambitious in sort of a weird way, but right during this whole period, and it's funny to think about, especially because he was so, everything was so focused around his marriage to Sylvia, but that his future wife, Laurie Anderson, right at the same time, fucking parlayed her top 20 new wave single into a quadruple album set that Warner Brothers put out. How the hell she convinced Warner Brothers, who wouldn't release a triple Prince album, but she got them to release a quadruple live album or recording of her performance art installation piece, The United States Live. So she was doing this huge, ambitious, overreaching stage performance that, again, it bears repeating. She got fucking Warner Brothers to release as a quadruple album. But, Reed, even, Sonic Youth, or the sort of the no wave stuff happening, and there he is, just kind of putting out an album every year. Like, he's just forging this sort of straight ahead path. And I've always found that interesting. And I actually think I think it's pretty cool. Anyway, what's not cool is the next one that we get to, the final album we will talk about here today, because I have talked for a long goddamn time, and that is 1986's woeful Mistrial, produced by Reed and Fernando Saunders. Who is the drumming on this thing? Or who is drumming on this thing, I should say. Jesus. Okay, well, I don't know. Is this the other album? Jesus Christ. So he made 2 albums where he's the only guitar player on, and this is the second. Ay, ay, ay. Or is he the only guitar player on Set the Twilight Reeling? I don't remember. I feel like Rathke was around for that. But he was on that tour. I know he was on that tour. But maybe Set the Twilight Reeling is the other album. Maybe that. At any rate, Mistrial. Shit album cover. I mean, look at this fucking thing. I mean, it's just hideous. Back cover's better, but I mean, what in God's name is this? I mean, it just looks like one of those records from somebody that like had made like one album and it didn't do very well. Like it just looks so indifferent. There was a parody. There was a parody interview that they had Lou Reed that somebody made. This is way back in the early 2000s. Of Reed promoting this album and claimed that it was the best album that he ever made. Reed had a tendency to say, this is the best album I've ever made for whatever his current album was. And they said, why? And Reed's response is, do you hear the spaces between the songs? It's complete silence. That's engineering. And for anyone who's ever seen Reed interviews from the 80s onwards, it's only a slight exaggeration. Yeah, yikes. These songs, I mean, the production, we are just now in whomping 80s shitville. I mean, I don't care what Poptimism says. I don't care what, like, the 80s sound should be reviled and should be held up as a matter of ridicule. It is an ungodly thing to behold. And it is the least flattering sound for anything even vaguely resembling rock music. But the real problem here, and again, it transcended, he transcended those limitations on New Sensations and created things that were truly beautiful. This has there's nothing transcending on here. These are thin songs. These barely count as songs, and not in a interesting, boiled down, minimalist way. These are just badly written songs. There's just not anything happening here. You can't even sort of look at it like what happened with Dylan with Under the Red Sky and be like, oh, but there's this sort of weird, sort of grim, grim tales sort of thing happening. Like there's an angle and there are ideas in there that you just sort of have to get to. I've even seen people try to defend Knocked Out Loaded, like, oh, he's starting to explore Southwestern motifs. There's no fucking motifs being explored on this record. It is just one after another. Let's run through it quickly. The title song, the first song on the album, nothing happening. It just is this thing. It's this thing that goes round and round for a few minutes and then it's over. That's all I can say about it. No Money Down. A Ray of Hope. No Money Down. Now go watch that video. Beavis and Butthead made it famous. I had not seen it before Beavis and Butthead. Holy mother. No Money Down is an amazing music video. It's incredible. It's the latex robot Lou Reed, but his hands coming up and ripping it apart. It's awesome. Apparently, according to legend, this is an apocryphal story, I don't know if it's true, apparently when Lou Reed's mother saw the video, she wept. Which is perfect. No Money Down actually works. The lyric is very sparse but interesting. There's a couple interesting details in it. It works, and the sort of smattering of horns and backing vocals and 80s-ness of it kind of coheres into something that's interesting, and that something could be like on a interesting movie soundtrack or something. Like it actually works. It doesn't fully work, but it approaches working, which is rare for this album. Then we get Outside. I have listened to this album, let's say about 36 times in my life. Some of these albums, The Blue Mask, for instance, I've listened to hundreds upon hundreds of times. I couldn't tell you a goddamn thing about Outside. And that says it all, really. Don't Hurt a Woman, sure, it's vaguely better. It sort of ties up the sort of undercurrent of physical abuse, the sort of the one of the sort of background themes in the Blue Mask and Legendary Hearts, and New Sensations. Deals with domestic abuse, and various scenes of domestic abuse. Don't Hurt a Woman is sort of the end of that era. I don't know that particular strand comes up again. It's vaguely better, but it's still not terribly memorable. And then there is Video Violence, which is just an absolutely horrendous thing. Believe it or not, I saw him perform this live. He really believed in this song. I don't know why. It is one of the most misbegotten 80s, over-earnest 80s protest songs, but it is so smug and high-minded and hectoring. I just don't know what he thought he was achieving in writing something like this. And the programmed music and the guitar lava sort of thrown over it, kind of indifferently splashed over it. It just doesn't work. It's just a fucking mess. I truly dislike both the song and this recording of it. Spit It Out. I don't know. Do you have an opinion about it? I don't know. And then the original rapper, which is at least fascinating. And god damn it, Lou Reed committed to this fucking song. I saw him perform it once, and he even performs it on the acoustic album, Perfect Night. He was fully committed. It has a ridiculous 80s video that might as well be a Wang Chung video. Like, the video is stupefying. Not as surreally bad as I Love You, Suzanne, but, it's pretty rough. But, I praise him for his commitment. And Reed, like Bob Dylan, was pro-hip-hop. Bob, of course, showed up on the Curtis Blow album, Kingdom Blow, and Reed was shouting out Run DMC and all sorts of other rap music. So, Reed was in on it early and recognized it for what it was, and truly the next generation of poetry from the streets of New York. And so, sure, the song, you can have a lot of fun at it at its expense, but I'm not gonna joke around too much about the original rapper. Is it good? It's not terribly good, but it's in its own way respectable, and it's engaged with the world in a way in which songs like Outside and Spit It Out aren't. And yeah, so I don't want to go in too much on the original rapper. I have a weird respect for it, and I respect Reed's commitment to it. Mama's Got a Lover. I have always wondered if this song was somehow about Warhol and Basquiat. I came up with that one day just because I was listening to this album. I was driving to work, bored out of my mind listening to this goddamn thing, and came up with that crackpot idea. I don't know. I mean, you have to come up with something when you're listening to this album. It's just the depths of despair. And then to me, the worst song. I'm gonna say is it the worst song out of this whole lot? It may very well be. I Remember You. I Remember You. Why is it the worst? Because it is the most nothing. It is the most nothing song on the most nothing album of his career. I don't know how long this record is, but I feel like this album, it feels like Knocked Out Loaded or Down in the Groove. It feels like it's over in like 25 minutes. It feels like an extended EP. There's just, to me, just a complete lack of engagement and lack of ambition. And, the Reed, like I said, he had the before he passed away, he did all the Velvet Underground records, these exhaustive trawls through the Velvet Underground, and then he remastered all his solo albums. But that the one round came out in a set going from the first solo album, ending with this. And I just have to imagine that if somebody, I don't know who the hell this would apply to, but if you bought that set and you didn't know anything about Lou Reed and you listened to those albums chronologically and it ends with this, you would have no reason to believe that there was anything good coming after this. 3 years later, he made his triumphant return with New York, and then Drella and Magic and Loss, which were masterful albums. Very, very ambitious albums that go way beyond what's being achieved here. This is like a kindergarten version, and those 3 albums are somebody at the top of their class at Harvard. You know, like it barely sounds like the same person. These songs barely track. Those are masterful, long album explorations of lives and attitudes and politics and, in some cases, spirituality. They're incredible albums. Following this, Reed did it was like the Amnesty International. So there's the song Voices of Freedom. It's okay. It's kind of a protest song. It's kind of a vague protest song. It's fine. And then he did, and then there are a bunch of one-off songs on movie soundtracks that come over the next 3 years. Some of them, like Something Happened, are masterful. There are a couple great songs in the ether. I feel like if Reed had taken a couple off of here and maybe waited a year or two, there maybe could have been a really strong album. But it would not be this, because these songs are just, it's incredible how little there is happening on this album, and how it just doesn't sustain sort of any vibe, idea, mood. It doesn't really commit to anything. It feels purely like a product. It feels very, very 80s. Maybe it's on the Amnesty International tour. The show is up on YouTube. There's an interesting show from the Mistrial tour that's up on YouTube as well. Just like a regular show from the touring. That's absolutely worth watching because he mixes in a lot of other songs. It's a more expanded 80s band. But it's a really good performance, and Reed is in a really good mood and very engaged and talking to the crowd. It's definitely a show worth watching. But what's really interesting, and I guess I'll sort of end on this, is on that Amnesty tour, they do a show. I guess it's the Amnesty tour. They do a show at Giant Stadium. So here he is, Lou Reed, the King of New York, playing to this vast audience of 80s youth. And he fucking wins them over. He wins them over. And he does Walk on the Wild Side, and they are with him. They are clapping along, and you're cheering for him. And he can see that he's connecting with this huge crowd. And it's lovely to watch, And you're thinking, good for him, right? But in true Lou Reed fashion, in one of the most Lou Reed moves ever, he fucking goes straight into, like, I'm sure they had the set worked out beforehand. And this 80s band, I don't know what these people's names are, but there's some yutz in an all-white suit, and he's fucking stuff up, and he misses a couple cues, and but now, it's all come together, and he's won them over. And with that, they go into fucking video violence. And I don't remember how long it is, but let's say it's 10 minutes. It's not 10 minutes, but it seems like it's 10 minutes. And holy shit, he truly just dumps a load of toxic waste on all of these people who are like Sting and U2 fans. He just... if he wasn't so earnest about it, it would feel like the most contentious and like interruptive move you could possibly make, and it ends with this like he's doing guitar feedback and like this you know, this like declamatory loud atonal ending, and you just like you have to respect that that was his idea of now I've got him on my side. I'll hit him with this. And it's kind of like, again, it's kind of like Dylan doing Masters of War at the Grammys in '91. On one hand, it's terrible. On the other hand, it's fucking awesome. No matter what the intentions of it are, it's awesome. And I've gone back and watched it several times. I first encountered it during the pandemic, and it's like it made me respect him in a whole different way yet again. So anyway, this has been very long. I was originally going to do just one record, but I decided to do a longer thing. If you have watched this, that's amazing. Thanks. That's seriously, thank you. This is the first of its kind. I have no idea how this will go in the future or what this will look like. I have no idea. This is just throwing this out into the world. So, you know, if you feel inclined to comment or subscribe, by all means, you know, feel free, go for it. And you know, again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.